The humid Bangkok air, thick even within the air-conditioned sanctuary of the BTS Skytrain, did little to cool the nervous flutter in Anong's chest. Below, the Sukhumvit traffic pulsed, a vibrant, chaotic artery of the city she was plunging into. Today marked her first day at Chick Designs Bangkok, a name whispered with reverence in interior design circles. It was a dream job, the culmination of years of study and late nights fueled by instant noodles and ambition. Yet, beneath the excitement simmered a familiar anxiety, the quiet voice of Kreng Jai whispering warnings against missteps, against causing inconvenience, against existing too loudly. Anong smoothed down her modest silk blouse, her bright, intelligent eyes reflecting the passing cityscape, shadowed by a hint of uncertainty. She clutched her portfolio tighter. Be diligent, be polite, fit in. The office buzzed with a sleek, minimalist energy that both thrilled and intimidated her. Glass walls, muted tones, strategically placed orchids. It screamed sophistication. And then there was Priya. Kun Priya, the senior designer, approached Anong with a smile that seemed perfectly calibrated, warm but holding something back. She was elegance personified, draped in sharp, tailored lines, her movements fluid and confident. "Anong, welcome Nakha," Priya purred, her voice smooth as polished concrete. "We're so pleased to have you. Don't worry, I'll show you the ropes. It can be overwhelming at first." Anong mumbled her gratitude, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Priya seemed kind, helpful. Maybe the knot of anxiety in her stomach could finally loosen. Priya guided her through introductions, her hand occasionally resting lightly on Anong's arm, a gesture that felt both reassuring and subtly possessive. Anong noted the deference in others' eyes when they spoke to Priya. This was a woman who commanded respect. Anong resolved to learn everything she could from her, to earn her place in this dazzling, competitive world. The initial briefings were a blur, but Priya's presence was a constant, guiding, explaining. Anong felt a flicker of unease only once when discussing a potential supplier. Priya dismissed Anong's suggestion with a light laugh. "Oh, darling, they're reliable, yes, but not up to our standard here. You'll learn." Anong's cheeks flushed, but she nodded quickly. Of course, Priya knew best. It was just guidance. She pushed the feeling down. Kreng Jai, don't make waves. The first real test came with the Serenity Condo project, a high-profile development demanding innovative spatial solutions. Anong was assigned to assist Priya directly. Thrilled by the opportunity, Anong threw herself into research, sketching late into the night in her small, peaceful apartment, the city lights a distant glitter. During a team brainstorming session, Anong shyly presented a concept for utilizing modular partitions to create flexible living spaces. The project lead seemed intrigued. But before Anong could elaborate, Priya leaned forward, her smile widening. "Anong has a good starting point," she announced smoothly, addressing the room. Building on Anong's initial thought, the real key, of course, is integrating smart home technology seamlessly within those partitions. That's where my experience with high-end tech integration becomes crucial. She continued, effortlessly weaving Anong's core idea into a narrative centered around her own expertise. Anong sat frozen, the blood rushing to her face. It wasn't exactly taking credit, was it? It was refining? Building upon? Yet the way Priya had phrased it subtly shifted the ownership, positioning Anong's contribution as preliminary, almost naive. A familiar pang hit her chest. Confusion mixed with a faint sting of injustice. But Priya was nodding encouragingly at her now, as if they were collaborators. Anong forced a smile, murmuring agreement. Saying anything else felt impossible, confrontational, a violation of the unspoken rules of deference and harmony. Kreng Jai held her tongue captive. Later that week, Priya reviewed Anong's draft designs for the condo's master suite. She scanned the detailed renderings, her expression unreadable. "Very efficient, Anong," she finally said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the screen. Her tone was light, almost playful. "You finished it quickly. The creative flair, the soul of the space, that will develop with more exposure, I'm sure." Anong's stomach tightened. Efficient? Was that a compliment or a criticism? It felt like both, a silken glove hiding a subtle jab. The implication hung in the air, competent perhaps, but lacking artistry. Deflated, Anong spent hours that evening staring at the designs, tweaking details, trying to inject the elusive soul Priya had mentioned, feeling increasingly unsure of her own instincts. The self-doubt, a seed planted in the brainstorming session, began to sprout insidious roots. Priya's words, delivered with such calm sophistication, were harder to dismiss than overt criticism. They slid under her defences, leaving her questioning her own abilities. The pattern continued, subtle yet corrosive. Anong, gaining confidence, presented a unique lighting concept directly to the firm's director during a brief encounter in the hallway. The director seemed genuinely impressed. Later that day, Priya stopped by Anong's desk, arranging a stray file with meticulous care. "I heard you spoke to Kun Somchai about the lighting," she said, her voice low and confidential. She leaned closer, her expensive perfume suddenly cloying. "A bit bold for your level." Wonderful initiative, of course, but perhaps it's best to let the senior team handle client strategy discussions for now. We wouldn't want any miscommunications. The smile was back, warm and concerned, but Anong felt a chill. It wasn't advice, it was a warning, a subtle assertion of hierarchy wrapped in feigned mentorship. Bold? Was ambition now a flaw? Anong felt herself shrinking, her earlier confidence evaporating under Priya's seemingly gentle admonishment. The constant undercurrent of being managed, corrected, and subtly put in her place was exhausting. She started noticing a dull ache blooming behind her eyes whenever Priya approached. One Friday evening, escaping the pristine chill of the office for the comforting chaos of Bangkok's streets, Anong felt utterly drained. The city's vibrant energy usually invigorated her, but tonight it felt grating. Back in her apartment, surrounded by her own carefully chosen, comforting textures, she finally called Mali, her closest friend from university, now working in Chiang Mai. Seeing Mali's warm, direct face on the video call was like a balm. Anong hesitantly recounted the recent incidents with Priya, trying to frame them objectively, almost apologizing for her own sensitivity. "She's probably just trying to help, right? Maybe I'm reading too much into it." Mali listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to indignation. "Anong, stop right there," Mali interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "That's not mentorship, that's undermining. Backhanded compliments, taking credit, making you doubt yourself. She sounds awful. Classic passive-aggressive behavior. Maybe even a bit of an energy vampire. Sounds like she leaves you exhausted." Mali's validation was a shock to Anong's system. Hearing her own jumbled feelings mirrored back so clearly, labelled and recognised, felt strangely liberating. "Energy vampire?" Anong echoed, the term unfamiliar but resonant. Mali sighed. "Yeah, people who just drain you with their negativity or their subtle digs. Look, Anong, Kreng Jai is one thing, but letting someone walk all over your self-esteem is another. You need to watch out for yourself." The conversation planted a crucial seed. Anong wasn't crazy. She wasn't being overly sensitive. Something was genuinely wrong. Armed with Mali's validation, Anong started observing Priya with a new, conscious awareness. It was like adjusting the focus on a camera lens. Suddenly the blurred background snapped into sharp detail. She saw the flicker of calculation in Priya's eyes before she delivered a carefully worded compliment. She noticed how Priya's tone shifted, becoming warmer, almost subservient, when speaking to superiors, compared to the subtle condescension she used with Anong and some other junior staff. She saw how Priya would subtly isolate her, interrupting Anong's conversations with other colleagues with a seemingly innocent query, diverting the attention. The pattern Mali had described was undeniable. Praise invariably followed by a but that diminished the achievement. Concerns dismissed as oversensitivity. "Oh, don't be so serious, Anong." Helpfulness performed for an audience, rarely genuine in private. The realization was sickening, but also clarifying. Priya wasn't a mentor, she was a gatekeeper, subtly ensuring Anong didn't shine too brightly, perhaps threatened by her potential. The constant vigilance, the mental energy required to decipher Priya's coded language, was profoundly draining. The headaches became more frequent. Anong found herself meticulously arranging the pens on her desk after every tense interaction, a small, unconscious ritual seeking order amidst the emotional chaos. She started researching passive-aggressive workplace behavior late at night, the descriptions mirroring her experiences with unnerving accuracy. Recognizing the pattern was one thing. Acting on it felt like preparing to scale a sheer cliff face, especially against the ingrained pull of Kreng Jai. But Mali's words echoed, "You need to watch out for yourself." Anong decided to start small, a tiny act of boundary setting. During a discussion about fabric samples for the Serenity condo, Priya interrupted Anong mid-sentence to redirect the conversation towards a supplier she preferred. Anong's heart began to pound, the familiar urge to defer rising like bile. She took a shallow breath. "Kun Priya," she said, her voice quieter than she intended, but steady. "May I just finish explaining the texture comparison for this option?" She met Priya's gaze briefly, then focused back on the samples. The air thickened. Priya blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her smooth features. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air, but she didn't speak. She simply nodded, a tight, almost imperceptible gesture. Anong quickly finished her point, her hands trembling slightly under the table. Inside, a chaotic mix of terror and exhilaration churned. She had done it. It was small, almost insignificant, but she hadn't simply folded. Afterwards, Priya's demeanour towards her shifted subtly, acquiring a cooler, more distant edge. The overt mentorship attempts lessened, replaced by a polite, professional watchfulness. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt marginally less suffocating than the constant, cloying manipulation. Current part characters, 2988. Total characters, 1,724. The final presentation for the Serenity Condo project loomed large, a culmination of weeks of intense work and simmering tension. This was the major client pitch, the one that could solidify Chick Designs Bangkok's reputation further, for Anong, potentially prove her capabilities beyond Priya's subtle dismissals. Priya, as lead designer, delegated tasks but maintained an iron grip on the overall narrative. Anong noticed small, unnecessary changes Priya made to her meticulously prepared mood boards and specification sheets just days before the presentation, shifting a colour slightly, rephrasing a description in a way that subtly altered its emphasis. They weren't improvements. They felt like territorial markings, constant reminders of who was ultimately in control. The stress mounted, coiling tight in Anong's stomach. She rehearsed her section of the presentation endlessly during her sweltering commutes on the BTS, her own voice sounding thin and uncertain in her head against the imagined backdrop of Priya's smooth confidence and the client's critical gaze. She felt caught between the need to perform flawlessly and the paralyzing fear of Priya's potential intervention. Mali's voice over a late-night call offered a lifeline. "Remember, Anong, you know your stuff. Focus on the client, on your work. Don't get sucked into her games. Breathe." The day arrived, thick with unspoken pressure. The meeting room was impeccably styled, cold glass and chrome reflecting the nervous energy. The client's powerful figures in Bangkok real estate radiated an air of demanding expectation. Priya was charm itself, guiding the initial stages of the presentation with effortless grace. Then it was Anong's turn. She stepped forward, focusing on the projection screen, her voice starting slightly shaky, but gaining strength as she delved into the materials concept, the rationale behind the textures, the sustainable sourcing, the way light would interact with surfaces. She spoke about the mood boards she had poured her heart into. She felt a fragile sense of ownership, a connection to the work itself. A senior client representative leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "An interesting approach to the natural stone, Kun Anong," he said, his voice sharp. "But considering the humidity levels in Bangkok, what assurances do we have regarding long-term maintenance and potential discoloration?" It was a challenging, valid question. Anong opened her mouth to respond, her research on sealants and specific stone grades ready on her tongue. Current part characters, 2,599. Total characters, 13,323. Before Anong could articulate her carefully prepared answer, Priya interjected, her voice like warm honey, smooth and encompassing. "A very perceptive question, Kun Viroj," she exclaimed, turning slightly towards the client, subtly angling her body to become the focal point. What Anong meant to convey, the emphasis was slight but unmistakable, and what we ultimately decided based on my experience with similar climates in luxury projects was to prioritize a specific synthetic composite that mimics the stone's aesthetic perfectly, but offers superior durability and requires minimal upkeep. It addresses your concerns directly while maintaining the desired visual impact. She smiled reassuringly at the client, then gave Anong a brief, almost pitying glance, as if rescuing her from a difficult spot. Anong's breath caught in her throat. Priya hadn't just interrupted, she had completely overridden Anong's choice, misrepresented her rationale, and substituted her own preferred solution, all while framing it as a collective decision led by her superior experience. The familiar heat rushed to Anong's face, prickling behind her eyes. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Every instinct, every fibre conditioned by years of Krengjai, screamed at her. Be silent. Nod. Agree. Don't cause trouble. Don't embarrass her. Don't embarrass yourself. She could feel the weight of expectation, the potential professional fallout of contradicting a senior designer in front of a major client. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She saw Mali's determined face in her mind's eye. Don't get sucked into her games. She saw her own late nights, the passion poured into selecting that specific stone, the research proving its suitability. It wasn't just about a design choice anymore. It was about her voice, her work, her integrity. Anong took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. She turned her body slightly, addressing the client directly, breaking Priya's hold on the conversation's geometry. She offered Priya a brief, polite nod, an acknowledgement, not an agreement. Thank you, Kun Priya, she said, her voice quiet but surprisingly firm, cutting through the tension. To clarify my original rationale for Kun Viroj, she made eye contact with the client. The specific quartzite selected, she named the stone, undergoes a specialized sealing process. I researched extensively, proven effective in high humidity environments similar to Bangkok. Data from architectural journals confirms its longevity and resistance to discoloration with the recommended maintenance schedule, which is actually less intensive than for some high-end composites. She paused, then added, My detailed comparison report, including maintenance data, is in the appendix. She didn't raise her voice, didn't betray anger. She simply stated the facts, calmly reclaiming her expertise and correcting the misrepresentation. She used my rationale, the concept I developed, I researched. The air crackled. Priya's smile froze, tightening at the edges. A flicker of disbelief, quickly masked, crossed her face. Anong could feel the director's gaze shift towards her, observant. The client, Kun Viroj, looked from Priya back to Anong, his expression unreadable but attentive. Anong held her ground, meeting his gaze steadily, her heart still pounding but a strange, unfamiliar calm settling within her. She had spoken. The rest of the presentation unfolded without further overt drama. Kun Viroj asked Anong a follow-up question about the sealant, which she answered concisely. Priya remained professionally composed, but a distinct coolness emanated from her side of the table. When the clients finally left, expressing cautious optimism about the project, the tension in the room didn't fully dissipate. The director, Kun Somchai, gathered his papers. He paused beside Anong's chair, giving her a brief, thoughtful look that was hard to interpret. Approval? Curiosity? Warning? He simply nodded almost imperceptibly and walked out. Priya avoided Anong's eye contact altogether as they cleared the meeting room, her movements brisk, her usual smooth chatter replaced by a clipped silence. The mask of charming mentorship had slipped, revealing the cold mechanics beneath. Anong didn't feel triumphant or victorious. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation won. Instead, a quiet, profound shift had occurred within her. The constant hum of anxiety, the gnawing self-doubt Priya's presence always induced, had lessened, replaced by a feeling of being grounded, solid. Later that evening, Anong walked out of the gleaming office tower into the thick embrace of the Bangkok night. The usual cacophony of street vendors, honking tuk-tuks, and overlapping conversations didn't feel grating tonight. Instead, the city's raw, unapologetic energy felt strangely welcoming. She felt the tension, habitually lodged between her shoulder blades, begin to release, melting away like ice in the tropical heat. She breathed deeply, the air thick with the scent of grilled meats and jasmine garlands. Priya wouldn't change. Anong knew that with a certainty that was liberating, not discouraging. The subtle digs, the manipulations, the need for control, those were Priya's patterns, her burdens to carry. But Anong realized with a clarity that felt like cool water washing over her that she had changed. She hadn't needed to become aggressive or confrontational in a way that violated her own nature. She had found a quiet strength, a way to hold her space, assert her truth, and protect her sense of self without shattering the intricate web of workplace relationships entirely. It wasn't about defeating Priya. It was about detaching from the emotional impact of Priya's behavior. It was about recognizing that Kreng Jai didn't have to mean self-erasure. She pulled out her phone, the screen bright against the darkening street. A quick text to Malay. Survived the presentation, stood my ground quietly, felt okay afterwards. Almost instantly, Malay's reply popped up. Yes, Anong, so proud of you. Told you you could. Drinks to celebrate next time I'm in BKK. A genuine smile touched Anong's lips. The connection, the simple validation from her friend, felt more significant than any outcome in the meeting room. She looked up at the towering buildings scraping the sky, the tangle of wires overhead, the relentless flow of people. Bangkok felt vast, overwhelming. But tonight, for the first time since starting her dream job, she didn't feel quite so small within it. The path ahead with Priya would likely remain complex, a careful navigation rather than an open collaboration. Perhaps she would eventually seek an internal transfer, or maybe she could carve out enough professional distance within her current role. The specifics didn't matter as much as the internal shift. She had faced the subtle toxicity, the insidious erosion of self-worth disguised as guidance, and she hadn't crumbled. She had found her footing. She hailed a taxi, the familiar yellow-green a welcome sight. As the cab merged into the pulsing traffic, Anong leaned back against the seat. She watched the city lights streak past, feeling not the exhaustion that had plagued her for weeks, but a quiet, resilient readiness for whatever the next day would bring. She was still Anong, still inherently polite, still mindful of others, but now she was also learning to be mindful of herself. And that, she suspected, was the most crucial design project of all. The following weeks settled into a new, tentative equilibrium. Priya remained professionally polite, but the cloying mentorship attempts ceased entirely. There was a distance, a cool correctness that replaced the earlier, more insidious intimacy. Interactions were brief, task-oriented. Priya still occasionally made comments that could be interpreted as undermining, but they lacked the same power over Anong. Having named the pattern, Anong could now recognize the barbs for what they were, reflections of Priya's own insecurities, not accurate assessments of Anong's worth. She developed quiet strategies. When Priya offered unsolicited advice that felt like criticism, Anong would respond with a neutral, "Thank you for your perspective, Kun Priya. I'll keep that in mind," before calmly redirecting the conversation back to the task at hand. She learned to document her contributions clearly in emails and project updates, creating a subtle paper trail of her work. She focused on building relationships with other colleagues, finding allies who appreciated her diligence and quiet creativity. She discovered that Kun Somchai, the director, had indeed noticed her competence during the Serenity presentation and began assigning her smaller independent tasks, allowing her space to grow away from Priya's immediate orbit. It wasn't always easy. There were days when a particularly cutting remark from Priya would still sting, days when the ingrained habit of Kreng Jai made asserting herself feel like wading through treacle. Doubt would whisper at the edges of her mind. Was she being too difficult? Was she isolating herself? On those days, she would recall the feeling of clarity after the presentation, the quiet strength she had found within herself. She would remember Mali's unwavering support. She started taking proper lunch breaks, sometimes walking to nearby Lumpini Park, finding solace under the shade of large trees, watching the slow-moving monitor lizards. These small acts of self-care became anchors, reminding her to prioritize her own well-being. She noticed the small succulent on her desk, once looking a bit neglected, was now thriving with regular watering, a simple, potent metaphor. She realized that protecting her energy wasn't selfish. It was necessary for her creativity and resilience to flourish. The constant low-level anxiety that had become her baseline began to recede, replaced by a more sustainable focus. Her work improved, infused with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, a new junior designer, fresh out of university and radiating the same eager-to-please anxiety Anong recognized so well, approached Anong hesitantly. "Kun Anong," the young woman whispered, glancing nervously towards Priya's glass-walled office. "Kun Priya just reviewed my initial sketches. She said they were charming, but lacked strategic depth. I don't even know what that means, and now I feel like everything I did was wrong. Anong saw her own past self reflected in the designer's wide, worried eyes. The familiar pang of empathy struck her, but this time it was coupled with a sense of clarity. She invited the junior designer, whose name was Pim, for a quick coffee at a small cafe tucked away down a nearby soy. Away from the charged atmosphere of the office, Anong listened patiently as Pim recounted her interaction with Priya, recognizing the signature blend of faint praise and vague, confidence-eroding criticism. Instead of just commiserating, Anong shared a little of her own experience, carefully and without malice. Kun Priya has very high standards, Anong said gently. Sometimes her feedback can feel indirect. Don't let it derail you completely. Focus on the specific, actionable points, if any. Strategic depth is vague. Perhaps ask her for a concrete example of what she means next time, or maybe run your concept by Kun Somchai for a different perspective. She also offered practical advice on Pim's sketches, highlighting their strengths before suggesting areas for development. Pim looked visibly relieved. Thank you, Kun Anong. I thought it was just me being too sensitive. Anong smiled. It's rarely just you. Helping Pim felt empowering in a different way. It solidified her own understanding and reinforced the importance of creating pockets of genuine support within the competitive environment. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning, in her own quiet way, to foster a healthier dynamic around her. Months passed. The Serenity Condo project launched successfully, with Anong receiving quiet acknowledgement from Kun Somchai for her contributions to the material concepts. Her relationship with Priya remained one of careful professional distance. There were no more attempts at overt mentorship or blatant undermining, just the occasional subtle competitiveness, which Anong now navigated with practiced neutrality. She had learned to detach, to observe Priya's behavior without internalizing it. The headaches were gone. The knot of anxiety rarely tightened in her stomach anymore. Her focus shifted from merely surviving Priya to thriving in her role. She took initiative on new projects, collaborated effectively with other team members, and her design sense grew sharper, more confident. She still valued politeness, still practiced consideration for others, but Kreng Jai no longer dictated her responses at the expense of her own well-being. It had found its proper place, a tool for harmonious interaction, not a cage for self-suppression. She understood that true respect wasn't earned through silent deference to toxic behavior, but through competence, integrity, and the quiet courage to hold one's ground. One evening, packing up her belongings, Anong noticed Priya watching her from her office. Their eyes met briefly across the open-plan space. Priya offered a small, unreadable nod. Anong returned it, polite but neutral. There was no animosity in the exchange, but no warmth either. It was simply acceptance of the boundary that now existed between them. A boundary Anong had painstakingly built, not with bricks and mortar, but with quiet assertion and unwavering self-respect. As she stepped out into the familiar embrace of the Bangkok night, the air felt lighter, cleaner. The journey hadn't been easy. It had required introspection, courage, and the willingness to feel uncomfortable. But standing there, amidst the vibrant pulse of the city, Anong felt a deep sense of peace. She hadn't changed the world, hadn't transformed her difficult colleague. She had simply learned to navigate her corner of it with her own well-being intact. She had learned to tend to her own inner garden, ensuring it had the light and space needed to grow, regardless of the encroaching weeds. And that, she knew, was a quiet victory worth celebrating. She smiled, hailed a cab, and headed home, ready for tomorrow. Current part characters, 2, 5 and 24 total characters, 2N 18, 2 and 21. Life at Chick Designs Bangkok continued, a tapestry woven with challenging projects, collaborative successes, and the ongoing low-level hum of office politics. Anong found her niche, excelling in projects that required meticulous research and a deep understanding of materials and textures. Her quiet competence earned her respect among her peers and gradually more autonomy from Kun Somchai. Her relationship with Priya remained a carefully managed détente. They coexisted, sometimes worked on adjacent aspects of large projects, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Anong no longer felt the need to brace herself before every interaction. She approached Priya with professional courtesy, maintained clear communication, and firmly but politely deflected any attempts, however subtle, to diminish her contributions or control her work. Priya, perhaps sensing the shift in power balance, or simply finding less satisfaction in targeting someone who no longer reacted emotionally, seemed to direct her energies elsewhere. Anong occasionally saw glimpses of the old patterns directed towards newer, more vulnerable staff members, and while she couldn't fight everyone's battles, she made a point of offering quiet support and validation to juniors like Pim when she could, sharing her own hard-won insights on navigating the workplace culture. She continued her friendship with Mully, their video calls a source of strength and laughter. Mully cheered on Anong's growing confidence and celebrated her small victories. "See? You didn't have to become someone you're not," Mully said during one call. "You just learned where your boundaries were and how to hold them. That takes real strength, Anong, especially when it goes against the grain." Anong realized Mully was right. Her transformation hadn't been about becoming louder or more aggressive. It had been about finding alignment between her inherent kindness and her need for self-preservation. It was about understanding that setting boundaries wasn't an act of hostility, but an act of self-respect, and ultimately a way to engage with the world more authentically and sustainably. The constant drain she used to feel was replaced by a more consistent energy, allowing her to invest more fully in her work and the relationships that genuinely nurtured her. She even started exploring her own creative side projects again, sketching ideas for furniture designs in the evenings, something she hadn't had the mental space for when Priya's negativity consumed so much of her headspace. The city itself felt different too. The once overwhelming chaos of Bangkok now seemed vibrant, full of possibility. She explored hidden temples, savoured street food without the accompanying knot of anxiety, and found joy in the small everyday details: the scent of rain on hot pavement, the intricate patterns on traditional textiles, the kindness of strangers. She was no longer just surviving in the city, she was truly living in it. One significant marker of her internal shift came during an annual performance review with Kun Somchai. In previous years, Anong would have been fraught with anxiety, rehearsing justifications, bracing for criticism. This year, she felt calm. She prepared thoroughly, outlining her accomplishments, identifying areas for growth, and articulating her career goals clearly. When Kun Somchai asked about her working relationship with Priya, a question he posed diplomatically, Anong didn't shy away. She didn't complain or vent, but stated calmly and factually, "Kun Priya and I have different working styles. I've learned how to collaborate effectively on shared projects while focusing on my own responsibilities." Kun Somchai nodded slowly, his expression indicating understanding. He commended Anong on her professionalism, her improved confidence, and the high quality of her recent independent work. He even mentioned a potential team lead role on a smaller project in the coming year. Anong left the review feeling validated, not just by the positive feedback, but by her own ability to navigate the conversation with honesty and composure. The ghost of Priya's influence no longer dictated her professional self-worth. The final scene wasn't one of dramatic confrontation or triumphant departure. It was quiet, almost mundane, yet deeply significant for Anong. It was a typical Tuesday evening. She was packing up, her desk clear, her mind already shifting towards the quiet sanctuary of her apartment. Priya was also leaving.